Hello, my name is Vinod Namboodiri. I'm a professor of computer science at Wichita State University. I'm also a senior scientist at the Envision Research Institute, which is a nonprofit serving those who are blind or visually impaired. What I wanted to talk about here is the need for a convergent and universal design approach to assistive technology. Okay, so want to start by talking a bit about myself and like the background I have and why I feel I connect with this workshop. Okay, so I was admitted to a PhD program back in 2003, and my initial research area was on mobile computing and wireless networks. Okay, sometime after that, I was diagnosed with this condition known as retinitis pigmentosa, which is a very rare disorder, affects 1 in 4,000, but it causes night blindness from childhood and then progressive tunnel vision. Okay, so for example, you can see how the tunnel vision kind of looks like for those with retinitis pigmentosa. And of course, the width of the tunnel actually varies with the level of light intensity. Okay, so that's something kind of I have been dealing with for a long time at this point. Okay, so but I continued what I had started. I received my PhD back in 2008 and continued to work on some of those topics because it's not easy to change your research area topics and those kind of things, right? Those are kind of not that easy. Okay, so I basically stayed the course at that point. Then after that point, around 2015, maybe when I was kind of becoming more of a middle level, maybe senior level faculty member, I happened to have a conversation with a local nonprofit known as Envision back in 2015. Okay, so this was a great conversation which allowed me to start doing some projects related to accessibility and assistive technologies. And Envision being part of the National Industries for the Blind, they kind of had a broad reach beyond just the city of Wichita. Okay, and then I got actually more time to learn about how work in the disability space is done by actually using a sabbatical to spend more time with Envision, understand that space, what are the needs, what are the challenges, right? And so I could prepare myself to work more in this area. Now that led to a lot of good things immediately. Like I became the principal investigator for a National Science Foundation research experiences for undergraduate side, where I could bring undergraduates to work on various research projects, and I was able to include projects on assistive technologies. And then I was actually able to start a planning effort in the NSF Smart and Connected Communities program, which allowed us to bring together various stakeholders to understand, okay, what are the needs out there in terms of assistive technology, specifically looking at wayfinding and navigation, which I will talk about later. Okay, so that was starting to happen at this point. And then I actually created a new lab known as Assistive and Accessible Computing Lab, completely focusing on now in this topic. As you saw from the beginning, as I started as a researcher, now I kind of had completely changed or transitioned or adapted. And I think you'll see this theme later. People with disabilities often kind of good at adapting or used to adapting and have to adapt. Okay, and then I started kind of growing after this point that I actually got a really big NSF, a Smart and Connected Communities research grant to work on wayfinding and navigation for persons with disabilities. And that kind of happened about 6 to 8 months back. I have always been a partner with Access Computing out of the UW. Okay, so that has helped me understand a lot of the computing and accessibility and assistive technology space, also understand the education side of things. Okay, so that has again helped me grow. And then, in addition to this workshop, I am actually the PI for a different workshop on the theme of disability inclusion in workplaces. Okay, again, a convergence accelerator workshop. So I'm excited about that as well to focus specifically on employment. Okay, but in general, this workshop I want to talk more about independent living. Okay, so that this is the kind of the growth phase where I feel like I have adapted, I have started to learn the space. In fact, I would feel fairly comfortable at this point, and I'm looking at, okay, now what can I do, right? I have this unique background of technical expertise, then experiences with disability, and how do I bring it all together? I consider myself quite fortunate that I was able to make this transition. I was able to work in a space where I want to make a difference, not just for myself, but I feel for those others who also face similar experiences and challenges. Okay, so and academia is actually very good in that sense. Like a lot of people, especially who are research oriented, get to pick their research topics, and I was able to bring my background in computing with what I wanted to kind of work with, and somehow it all came together. Okay, so that's a background of how I'm approaching this talk. Okay, so this slide that I'm showing is actually showing kind of a schematic for a community where you have various buildings. And my research currently is focusing on how can we augment a community and all its physical infrastructure with more, what I would say, smart infrastructure, so we can understand what is where. So my goal with some of my research is how can we augment physical infrastructure so people with disabilities can receive various location based services. To give you an example, if somebody is indoors in a building, GPS wouldn't work, right? So if you want location information, especially for example, a blind individual wants to know how to get to a restroom, right? So those kind of turn by turn instructions for navigation currently are not available. Okay, so I'm interested in augmenting the physical infrastructure, going beyond GPS so it works in other areas as well, providing people with disabilities. A wheelchair user may want to know where the ramp is, wherever they are kind of moving around. Somebody with, let's say, cognitive impairments may want additional help making decisions as to how to get around, right? So there are a lot of broader benefits of location-based services, which is what I'm interested in looking at. Okay, so in this visual, I'm basically talking about multiple applications that I want to build upon this augmented physical infrastructure. Things like remote assistance. How can persons with disabilities reach out for help, and what's the most efficient way to receive help, which is cost effective as well? Something like transit. What's the best way to find and board transit wherever you are, indoors, outdoors, maybe underground? Those kind of situations. That's something that's important. Then something like emergency evacuation. How do you exit spaces, specifically considering the needs of people with disabilities, right? They may all need to use different kinds of exits, like an elevator, maybe the stairs are okay, maybe they need ramps. There may be areas which are not safe. How do you get that information? How do you avoid congestion? So those are all things that I'm interested in building upon this augmented physical infrastructure. And eventually, I do want to make sure that people with diverse disabilities can access these applications, right? So it needs a personalizable application interface that somebody who is hearing impaired can use more visuals. Somebody who is blind might use more audio, right? So it has to be customizable to meet the needs of the individuals that are using these applications. So that's the suite of applications that I want to build in terms of location-based services. And this will also serve as examples of what I'm going to say that we need to do during this workshop, or what are the big ideas that maybe that we want to look at. Okay, so want to motivate a few areas, like, so this prompt of what is working in terms of this workshop. So what I believe right now that is working, that is good. Okay, so awareness is increasing about disability, right, as being maybe part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? The ADA, right, has been around for a few decades now, and I think that has helped a lot. And I think there is more awareness of what it's supposed to mean, and that is helping, like especially in terms of accessibility at university campuses, the classes that are being offered. So those are all good things. You can see funding agencies increasingly consider disability as an important, let's say, broadening of participation, right? Broader impacts, those kind of aspects. So those are really good things, I believe, that I think is going to help in terms of this workshop. I also believe technological capabilities are really coming together. Great advances in AI, digital transformation, high speed communication networks, various wireless communication networks, 5G, maybe beyond. Things like smart manufacturing, allowing us to create things fast and in an economic manner. So I think these are all going to help with assistive technologies and how we can bridge the gaps. The technology, I think, is actually not the bottleneck at this point. Okay, so which leads me to the barriers or challenges that I'm thinking that we need to look at. So even though I mentioned that there is growing awareness, I still feel that disability is not always part of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. In fact, there is not much beyond federal agencies and some mega corporations. A lot of agencies, universities do not really consider disability as much as maybe a core theme of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, it's kind of typically being treated still as maybe a side aspect of it. And I think I would like to really see disability become more of a core part of this, which would help. I think the other barrier in this space is that there are many, many challenges. It's not like we have a few and then we just solve it and it's done. Okay, part of that is that there are many types of disabilities. It's not easy to actually get a grip of all of these disabilities and what the challenges and needs are. Also within disabilities there is a whole spectrum between, let's say, less severe to very severe, impacting quality of life kind of disabilities. So because of this, it's not easy to come up with solutions just because of the very diverse nature of disability and its types and characteristics. I also feel a big challenge or barrier is perception that, oh, disability is kind of affecting only a small or niche population. A lot of the solutions do not need to focus on this population, right? It's difficult to impact this population because it's small, which is kind of untrue. This is a growing percentage of the population. I think only if people kind of look at the numbers, I think they might see that. But this perception is there and it's kind of been difficult, like a stigma to kind of get rid of. Then the economics, I think, is always going to be a barrier and challenge. Like, how do we justify, promote, make people understand? How do we provide assistive technologies and accessibility technologies in a cost efficient manner, which makes those who provide it feel this is justified or perhaps law allows us to maybe get the message through, or a combination in some sense. But the economics is always center into a lot of the barriers as to why we don't see a lot of the accommodations being easier. In summary of the barriers and challenges, I believe that we are still at a needs finding stage in terms of assistive technology. There is always understanding, okay, what are the needs, and then somebody is going to try and make some kind of an assistive technology work. It's not perfect, but somebody at least believes they have done something, and then we kind of go around in that cycle that we kind of just try to find the needs, and then we kind of try to solve some of these things. And I feel kind of in an unfair manner, a lot of the rest of the population without disabilities, I think a lot of the companies and industry mainly focuses on wants finding. Okay, what else can we provide them to improve their quality of life? It's not just the basic needs, but way beyond that. While this population with disabilities, I think, is often just at meeting the minimum requirements of quality of life. Okay, so I think there is this unfairness, and persons with disabilities still stuck at the needs finding stage, while there is a lot of wants finding happening everywhere else. Okay, and then where do we need to go? Okay, so this is where I want to conclude is, what do we do next? Okay, so one of the things I actually really believe based on my work, my experiences, is that we need to embrace universal design as much as possible. Okay, so instead of coming up with very customized solutions for each disability, at least we need to bring the commonalities of all these disabilities and try to work up universal design based solutions which can be making things easier for a whole broad spectrum of the population, including various disabilities. So this is going to be important. And in terms especially of economies of scale and scope, I believe if you consider multiple disabilities, various characteristics, try to have a common technology infrastructure, this can help not just with scale, but scope, and kind of help answer some of those questions as to, okay, how do we justify this in terms of cost? But if we just can increase the scale and scope, I think that answer becomes easier. As this workshop is trying to do, a convergent approach to problem solving is needed. I think it has been largely missing. I think I'm happy to see this workshop trying to encourage this approach, but I did want to mention that this is, I believe, something very important. Based on my experiences and work, I think there are many facets where we need to uh, address challenges. Okay, things like aging in place, smart homes, especially the living piece, especially in a home kind of situation. Then getting around, how do people with disabilities get around, transportation. Then how do they find things, indoors, outdoors, in the community, right? So seamless and scalable techniques need to be developed so that it's something they don't have to think twice. Okay, do I really need to go there? Or they should just feel very comfortable in getting out and about without worrying about independently getting somewhere or having to ask help. Okay, that independence piece is very important. And of course, education and training. I think we have to train the next generation to understand what is accessibility, why assistive technologies play such an important role, not just for people with disabilities, but the general population. I think training the trainers is important, employers, businesses, those who employ people with disabilities. So that entire education and training piece for society is important for the rest to actually fall in place. So that I believe is important. And finally, but I think not necessarily the least, is broader acceptance of disability as part of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I think we need to really work on that. I think agencies like NSF, I think, really do a good job by clearly making it apparent that disability is part of the broader impacts, the broadening participation. But you will not currently see as many other entities including disability easily anyway. And somehow I think the community needs to work on fixing that and making it a central part of DEI, which I think will help with a lot of the other things we are trying to do in terms of design of technology and education, training, everything. Okay, so thanks. These are my ideas, and I would be very happy to discuss more on any of these points and elaborate and perhaps learn from others as well, where my thinking may not be in the right direction or how I can refine some of these thoughts. Thank you.